The private wing of Seoul's most secure hospital was silent except for the rhythmic beep of machines keeping a dying man alive. Liam Owen, the name that made politicians sweat and rivals disappear, lay motionless behind reinforced glass. His chest rose and fell in shallow, mechanical rhythms. The doctors had given him 48 hours, maybe less. Outside the ICU, men in black suits spoke in low voices. Not about saving him, about replacing him. Funeral arrangements were already being finalized. Succession plans quietly drafted. The empire was preparing to move on. Then the door opened. A young girl stepped inside, barefoot, shaking, holding a cracked plastic bottle filled with cloudy water. Security moved instantly, hands on holsters, voices sharp, but she didn't run. She didn't beg. She walked straight to the glass wall separating her from the most dangerous man in Korea. And she said 6 words that stopped everything. "This water is why he's dying." The room froze, not because of what she said, because of what it meant. The girl's words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Security didn't move. The lawyers didn't speak. Even the machines seemed to pause, as if the room itself had inhaled and forgotten to breathe out. Dr. Park Young-woo stood nearest to the glass partition, his clipboard slack in his hands. He'd been the one to deliver the prognosis 6 hours ago. Stage 4 organ failure. Cause unknown. Prognosis irreversible. He'd seen men die before, good men, bad men, men who deserved it and men who didn't. But he'd never seen anyone die like this. Slowly, systematically, as if something inside Liam Owen was being erased one cell at a time. And now this girl, this barefoot child who looked like she hadn't eaten in days, was standing in a room that required 3 security clearances just to enter, holding a bottle of dirty water like it was evidence in a murder trial. Behind her, the lead security officer finally found his voice. "Sir, I don't know how she got past. Let her speak." The command came from the back of the room, low and sharp. It belonged to a man in his 50s with silver hair and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Kwon Jae-sung, Liam's oldest lieutenant. The man who would inherit the empire if Liam didn't wake up. Dr. Park turned to look at him. Kwon's face was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the girl with the intensity of someone calculating risk. The girl didn't flinch. She lifted the bottle slightly, her fingers trembling but her gaze steady. "My name is Daisy Spring. I live in Yongjae District, near the old shipping docks. 3 months ago, my mother started getting sick. Headaches, vomiting. Her skin turned gray. The doctors said it was cancer. But it wasn't." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "It was the water from the wells near the docks. The same wells your trucks dump chemicals into every Tuesday night." Silence. Dr. Park felt something cold slide down his spine. He glanced at the monitors beside Liam's bed. Elevated liver enzymes, renal shutdown, neurological degradation. Symptoms that didn't fit any known disease, but fit perfectly with prolonged heavy metal poisoning. "That's a serious accusation," Kwon said quietly. He stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you have proof?" Daisy's jaw tightened. "My mother died 2 weeks ago. I brought her to 4 hospitals. None of them would help. They said we couldn't afford the tests." She held up the bottle again. "This is from the same well. I've been keeping it since she got sick. Because I knew someone was poisoning us. And no one cared because we're poor and invisible." One of the younger men near the door scoffed. "You think you can walk in here and accuse us of—" "Enough." Kwon's voice cut through the room like a blade. He looked at Dr. Park. "Is what she's saying possible?" Dr. Park hesitated. His career had taught him when to speak and when to stay silent. This was a moment that could end either way. He glanced at Liam's pale, sunken face behind the glass. The man who built an empire on fear and loyalty. The man who was now dying from something invisible. "It's possible," Dr. Park said slowly. "The symptoms align. If there's been long-term exposure to industrial runoff, arsenic, lead, cadmium, it would explain the organ failure. It would also explain why we haven't been able to identify a pathogen." Kwon's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He turned back to Daisy. "And you think someone in this organization is responsible?" "I don't think," Daisy said. I know. My mother used to work in the laundry service that cleans your warehouses. She saw the trucks. She saw the barrels. She told me to stay quiet because she was afraid. Her voice broke, but staying quiet killed her. And now it's killing him. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from behind the glass, a sound. A rasp. Faint. Barely human. Dr. Park's head snapped toward the monitors. Liam's eyes were open. Just barely. Slits of dark brown struggling against the sedation and the weight of dying. His lips moved, dry and cracked, forming words that no one could hear. Dr. Park moved quickly, pressing the intercom button. Mr. Owen, can you hear me? Liam's hand twitched. His fingers curled weakly against the white sheets. His mouth opened again, and this time sound came out. Something isn't right. The room went still. Dr. Park leaned closer to the speaker. What do you mean, Mr. Owen? Liam's eyes drifted, unfocused, searching the ceiling as if looking for something that wasn't there. His breath rattled in his chest. Tastes wrong. Water tastes wrong. Quan stepped forward, his face tight. Liam, do you know where you are? But Liam's eyes had already closed again. His hand went limp. The monitors continued their steady, indifferent rhythm. Dr. Park straightened, his heart pounding. He looked at Daisy, then at Quan, then at the bottle of water still clutched in the girl's hands. We need to test that, he said quietly. Quan didn't answer right away. He studied Daisy with the same cold precision he used to evaluate threats. Then he nodded once. Do it. Dr. Park reached out, and Daisy handed him the bottle. It was light, the plastic worn and cracked from being carried too long. Inside, the water was murky, tinged with a faint chemical sheen that caught the fluorescent light. He turned to one of the nurses. Get this to the lab. Priority analysis. I want a full toxicology screen within the hour. The nurse took the bottle and disappeared through the side door. Daisy stood alone now, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her body together. She looked smaller without the bottle. Younger, more breakable. Quan watched her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. If you're lying, you won't leave this building. Daisy met his eyes. I'm not lying. Then you'd better hope you're right, Quan said. Because if that water proves nothing, you've just accused the wrong people of murder. He turned to the security officer. Keep her here. No one in or out until we have results. The officer nodded and moved to stand beside Daisy. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring through the glass at the dying man whose empire had destroyed everything she loved. Dr. Park returned to Liam's monitors, his mind racing. If the girl was right, if the water was poisoned, if Liam had been drinking from the same contaminated source, it meant someone inside the organization had been covering it up. Someone who stood to gain from Liam's death. He glanced at Quan, who was now standing near the window, his back to the room, phone pressed to his ear. Quiet. Controlled, already moving pieces on a board no one else could see. And for the first time since Liam had been admitted, Dr. Park realized something. This wasn't just about saving a life. This was about what happened when the truth walked into a room that had spent years burying it. Daisy had stopped shaking, but she hadn't stopped remembering. The security guard stood 3 feet away, arms crossed, watching her like she might vanish into the sterile white walls if he blinked. But Daisy wasn't going anywhere. She'd come too far, survived too much. And now, standing in this cold room surrounded by men who could erase her with a phone call, all she could think about was her mother's hands. They had been beautiful once. Soft, always smelling faintly of the jasmine soap she saved for special occasions. Daisy used to watch her braid her hair in the mornings before work, humming old songs neither of them knew the names of. Her mother had worked 3 jobs, laundry service at the docks, night cleaning at a restaurant in Gangnam, and weekend shifts at a factory that made cheap electronics for export. She never complained. Not once. Until the headaches started. Daisy remembered the exact day. It was a Thursday in late autumn, just after the first frost. Her mother had come home early, which never happened, and sat down at their small kitchen table without taking off her coat. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy. She pressed her fingers to her temples and whispered, I just need to rest for a minute. But the minute turned into an hour. The hour turned into days. At first, the doctors said it was stress. Overwork. They prescribed rest and cheaper meals and sent her mother home with a bottle of pills that did nothing. Daisy had believed them because she was 14 and didn't know yet that some people were allowed to be sick and others were just expected to survive it. Then the vomiting started. Then the rashes. Then the confusion. Her mother would forget where she was. Forget Daisy's name. Stare at the wall for hours like she was watching something no one else could see. Daisy took her to another hospital. Then another. Each time the answer was the same. Too expensive. Come back when you have insurance. Have you tried drinking more water? Drinking more water. Daisy almost laughed when the last doctor said it, except her mother was bent over in the waiting room, coughing blood into a tissue, and laughter felt like a betrayal. So Daisy went home, and she filled a bottle with water from the well behind their building. The same well everyone in Yongjae district used because the pipes had been broken for 2 years and the city never bothered to fix them. She held the bottle up to the light and saw the faint shimmer on the surface, the way it caught the sun like oil. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it was wrong. She started asking questions. Quietly at first. The neighbors didn't want to talk. They looked away when she mentioned the trucks that came at night, the ones with no markings that parked near the docks and unloaded barrels into the drainage canals. One old woman grabbed her arm and whispered, "Don't go looking for trouble, girl. People who ask questions around here stop asking." But Daisy kept the bottle. She hid it under her bed, wrapped in an old shirt, because some part of her knew she would need it. That one day someone would have to listen. Her mother died on a Tuesday, not in a hospital, not surrounded by doctors. She died in their one-room apartment with peeling wallpaper and a window that wouldn't close all the way. Daisy held her hand and felt it go cold. Her mother's last words weren't profound. They weren't comforting. She just looked at Daisy with eyes that didn't recognize her anymore and said, "The water tastes funny." Daisy didn't cry at the funeral. There were only 4 people there. A neighbor who brought rice. A priest who didn't know her mother's name. A man from the factory who stayed for 10 minutes and left without speaking. Daisy stood beside the grave and thought about all the ways the world had decided her mother didn't matter. And then she heard about Liam Owen. It wasn't hard to find the news. Everyone in Yongjae knew who he was. The man who owned the docks, the shipping routes, the warehouses where her mother had folded laundry for 15 years. The man whose empire ran on silence and fear and the unspoken agreement that some lives were worth more than others. When Daisy heard he was dying, she felt nothing at first. Not satisfaction. Not grief. Just a hollow kind of clarity. Then she heard the symptoms. Organ failure. Unknown cause. Rapid deterioration. The same thing that had killed her mother. And Daisy understood. She didn't know how it had happened. Didn't know if Liam had been drinking the same poisoned water or if someone had made sure he did. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time, the man at the top was dying the same way the people at the bottom had been dying for years. And Daisy had proof. She'd kept the bottle. Even after the funeral. Even after the landlord evicted her and she had to sleep in a subway station for 3 nights. She kept it because it was the only thing left that proved her mother's death wasn't random. Wasn't fate. Wasn't just bad luck. It was murder. So she went to the hospital. She didn't have a plan. Didn't have money for a bus, so she walked. 12 miles in shoes that were falling apart. She got lost twice. Security stopped her at the front entrance. But she waited until a delivery van pulled up and slipped in behind it. She took the stairs because the elevators required keycards. Climbed 9 floors. Her legs burned. Her feet bled. But she didn't stop. Because stopping meant her mother died for nothing. Stopping meant the water would keep poisoning people and no one would care. Stopping meant power would win again the way it always did. When Daisy finally reached the ICU, she didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door and walked in like she belonged there. Like she had every right to stand in a room full of men who could crush her without thinking twice. And when they tried to remove her, she said the only thing that mattered. The truth. Now, standing in the cold fluorescent light with a security guard watching her and doctors whispering behind glass, Daisy felt the weight of the bottle's absence. She'd handed it over, given away the only proof she had. And if they decided not to believe her, if they buried the results the way they buried everything else, she had nothing left. except her voice. The guard's radio crackled. A voice came through, clipped and professional. Dr. Park wants her moved to the waiting area. The guard nodded and gestured toward the door. Let's go. Daisy didn't argue. She followed him down a long hallway lined with paintings that probably cost more than her mother's entire life. They passed nurses who didn't look at her. Past men in suits who stepped aside like she carried a disease. She was led to a small room with plastic chairs and a television playing muted news. The guard pointed to a chair. Sit. Don't move. Daisy sat. The door closed behind him, but she heard the lock click. She was alone. For the first time since walking into the hospital, Daisy let herself breathe. Let herself feel the exhaustion that had been building in her bones for weeks, months, years. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. And for just a moment, she let herself imagine what her mother would say if she were here. Probably something about being careful, about not trusting powerful men, about coming home safe. But Daisy wasn't going home. Not until someone listened. Not until the people who poisoned her mother's water faced what they'd done. Even if it killed her. Especially if it killed her. Because some things were worth dying for. And the truth was one of them. The lab results came back in 43 minutes. Dr. Park stood in the hallway outside Liam's ICU, staring at the printout in his hands like it might change if he looked at it long enough. Behind him, the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune. Nurses moved past without speaking. Everyone in this wing had learned a long time ago that silence was safer than curiosity. But the numbers on the page weren't silent. Arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury, levels high enough to kill slowly, high enough to make it look like natural organ failure if no one thought to check. High enough that whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. Dr. Park's hands were steady, but his pulse wasn't. He'd been a doctor for 22 years. He'd seen gunshot wounds and poisonings and deaths that made no sense until they did. But this was different. This wasn't a gang war or a bad deal gone wrong. This was systematic, deliberate, and it had been happening long enough that an entire neighborhood had been dying in silence. He turned and walked back into the ICU. Quan was still there, standing near the window with his phone in his hand. He looked up when Dr. Park entered, his expression unreadable. Two other men stood near the door now, younger, sharper, the kind who didn't need to carry guns to make people nervous. Dr. Park held up the printout. The girl was right. Quan didn't move. Explain. The water she brought contained lethal concentrations of industrial heavy metals. Arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury. Long-term exposure would cause exactly the symptoms Mr. Owen is experiencing. Organ failure, neurological damage, immune collapse. Dr. Park paused. It would also explain why we couldn't identify a disease. Because it wasn't a disease. It was poisoning. One of the younger men scoffed. So some kid brings in dirty water and we're supposed to believe. I ran the tests myself, Dr. Park said, his voice sharper than he intended. 3 times. The results are consistent. And when I cross-referenced Mr. Owen's blood work from the past 6 weeks, the markers match. He's been ingesting contaminated water for at least 2 months. Quan's jaw tightened. He took the printout from Dr. Park's hands and scanned it in silence. When he looked up, his eyes were cold. Where is the girl? Locked in the waiting room on the east wing. Bring her here. Dr. Park hesitated. Mr. Quan, if what she's saying is true, then someone in your organization has been. I know what it means, Quan said quietly. Bring her here. Now. Dr. Park nodded and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the empty hallway. When he reached the waiting room, the guard was still standing outside. Dr. Park unlocked the door and stepped inside. Daisy was sitting in the same plastic chair, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked up when he entered, and for a second, Dr. Park saw something in her face that made his chest tighten. Not fear, not hope, just exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying a weight no one else could see. They want to see you, he said. Daisy stood without a word and followed him back down the hallway. Her bare feet made no sound on the tile. She didn't ask questions, didn't speak, just walked like someone who had already decided what she was willing to lose. When they entered the ICU, Quan was waiting. He stood in the center of the room, the printout still in his hand. The two younger men flanked him like shadows. Quan looked at Daisy for a long moment. Then he held up the paper. Your water tested positive. Heavy metals. Industrial contamination. Enough to kill. Daisy's expression didn't change. I know. Do you know where it came from? The wells near the docks. Your docks. The ones your trucks dump chemicals into every Tuesday night. One of the younger men stepped forward. That's a lie. We don't. Quan raised a hand, and the man went silent. Quan's eyes stayed on Daisy. Can you prove that? My mother worked in your warehouses for 15 years, Daisy said. She saw the trucks. She saw the barrels. She told me to stay quiet because she knew what happened to people who didn't. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. But staying quiet didn't save her. It just let you keep killing people no one cared about. The room went still. Quan's face gave nothing away, but something shifted in his posture. He turned to Dr. Park. How long has Mr. Owen been drinking this water? Based on the toxin levels, at least 2 months. Possibly longer. And the source? Dr. Park hesitated. If the girl's claim is accurate, it would have to be a consistent supply. Something he consumed daily. Water. Tea. Anything prepared with contaminated water. Quan's jaw clenched. He turned to one of the younger men. Find out what Liam's been drinking. Every supplier. Every delivery. I want names. The man nodded and left the room. Quan looked back at Daisy. If you're lying. I'm not. If you're lying, Quan continued, his voice dropping. You won't leave this building alive. Do you understand? Daisy met his gaze. I understand, but I'm not lying. And you know I'm not. Because he's dying the same way my mother did. The same way dozens of people in Yangtze are dying. And the only difference is that when it happens to him, people care. Quan's eyes narrowed. You think this is about justice? No, Daisy said quietly. I think this is about proof. And I think someone in your organization made sure he drank the same poison they've been dumping on people like me for years. The words landed like a grenade. Quan's expression darkened. He turned to the remaining man by the door. Lock down the building. No one in or out. I want security footage from every entrance for the past 3 months. And I want a list of everyone who had access to Liam's residence. The man nodded and disappeared. Dr. Park watched it all unfold with a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a medical case anymore. It was a fracture. A crack in the foundation of an empire built on control. And Daisy, this barefoot girl with nothing left to lose, had just driven a wedge into it. Quan turned back to her. You're going to stay here, under guard, until we know who did this. And then what? Daisy asked. Quan didn't answer. He just looked at her with the kind of cold calculation that had kept him alive in a world where most men didn't last 5 years. Then he walked out of the room. Dr. Park stood there, caught between the girl and the machines keeping Liam Owen barely alive. He looked at Daisy, and for the first time since this started, he realized something. She wasn't here to save Liam. She was here to make sure the truth didn't die with him. And that made her the most dangerous person in the room. They came for Daisy 3 hours later. Not the security guard who had been watching her. Not Quan. 2 men she'd never seen before, both wearing dark suits that fit too well and expressions that fit even better. They didn't speak when they entered the small room where she'd been waiting. They just stood in the doorway, blocking the light, and one of them gestured toward the hall. Daisy didn't move. Where are we going? Mr. Quan wants to see you, the taller one said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. The kind of voice that had delivered bad news before and would do it again without flinching. Daisy stood slowly. Her legs ached from sitting too long, from walking too far, from carrying weight she was never supposed to bear. But she followed them anyway because what choice did she have? They led her down a different hallway this time. Narrower, dimmer, no windows. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead like they were struggling to stay alive. Daisy's pulse quickened, but she kept her face blank. She'd learned a long time ago that showing fear only made things worse. They stopped at a door near the end of the hall. One of the men opened it and stepped aside. Daisy walked in. The room was small. A table, 2 chairs, a single light hanging from the ceiling. Quan sat on the far side of the table, his hands folded in front of him. His face was calm, but his eyes weren't. The door closed behind her. Locked. Quan gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Daisy sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Quan studied her the way someone might study a broken piece of machinery, trying to decide if it was worth fixing or better off discarded. Finally, he leaned forward. You've caused a problem. Daisy said nothing. The water tested positive. You were right about that. But now people are asking questions. Uncomfortable questions. And uncomfortable questions cost money. Time. Control. He paused. Do you understand what I'm saying? You want me to leave, Daisy said quietly. I want you to disappear. The words hung in the air like smoke. Daisy felt her chest tighten, but she didn't look away. She'd known this was coming. Known it the moment she walked into the hospital. People like her didn't accuse people like him and walk away unscathed. Quan reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table. There's money in here. Enough to leave Seoul. Start over somewhere no one knows your name. Forget this ever happened. Daisy stared at the envelope. She didn't touch it. Quan continued, his voice dropping. You stay. And the people who poisoned that water, the people who killed your mother, make sure you don't talk to anyone else. Ever. Daisy's hands trembled in her lap. She clenched them into fists to make them stop. You're protecting them. I'm protecting the organization, Quan said. There's a difference. No, Daisy said. There isn't. Quan's jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair, and for a second, Daisy thought she saw something flicker across his face. Not regret. Not guilt. Just the faint acknowledgement that he was about to do something he'd done 100 times before and would do 100 times again. He stood. You have until morning to decide. Take the money and leave, or stay and see what happens to people who don't know when to stop talking. He walked to the door and knocked twice. It opened immediately. He left without looking back. The two men entered and gestured for Daisy to stand. She did, her legs shaking now, her mind racing. They led her back down the hallway, but not to the waiting room. This time, they took her to a stairwell at the far end of the building. One of the men opened the door and pointed down. Exits at the bottom. Don't come back. Daisy looked at him, then at the envelope still clutched in her hand. She hadn't remembered picking it up, but there it was. Heavy. Final. She walked down the stairs in silence. Each step echoed in the empty concrete shaft. When she reached the ground floor, she pushed open the door and stepped into the night. The air was cold. Sharp. She stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital and stared at the building's glowing windows. Somewhere up there, Liam Owen was still dying. Somewhere up there, the people who poisoned him were still walking free. And somewhere up there, the truth she'd carried for months was being buried again. Daisy looked down at the envelope. She could feel the bills inside. Could imagine the life it might buy. A bus ticket. A room somewhere far away. A chance to stop running and just breathe. But her mother's voice was louder. The water tastes funny. Daisy tore the envelope in half. Then in half again. She let the pieces fall to the ground and turned back toward the hospital. She didn't get 3 steps before her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A cheap, cracked thing she'd bought secondhand 2 years ago, and saw a message from an unknown number. If you care about the truth, go to the back entrance. Now. Daisy's breath caught. She looked around, but the street was empty. No cars. No people. Just shadows and the distant hum of the city. She hesitated for only a second. Then she ran. The back entrance was a service door near the loading docks. Daisy found it unlocked. The hallway beyond it dark except for a single emergency light. She stepped inside, her heart pounding, and followed the hallway until she saw a figure waiting near the elevator. Dr. Park. He looked exhausted. His coat was wrinkled, his tie loose. When he saw Daisy, he let out a breath. You came. What's happening? Daisy asked. Liam crashed 20 minutes ago. Full cardiac arrest. We got him back, but barely. He's got maybe 12 hours left. Maybe less. Dr. Park ran a hand through his hair. And someone just removed your lab results from the system. All of them. Every test. Every record. Gone. Daisy's stomach dropped. Quan. I don't know. But whoever it is, they're erasing the evidence. And without those results, there's no proof the water was poisoned. No proof Liam was poisoned. No proof any of this ever happened. Daisy's hands clenched into fists. So they win. Dr. Park looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Something tired and angry and done with pretending. Not if we don't let them. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and held it up. I made a backup. Everything. Blood work. Toxicology. The water analysis. All of it. But I can't use it. If I come forward, they'll bury me. Bury my career. Maybe worse. He pressed the drive into Daisy's hand. But you can. You already have nothing left to lose. Daisy stared at the small piece of plastic in her palm. Felt impossibly light. Impossibly heavy. What do I do with it? She whispered. Find someone who'll listen, Dr. Park said. A journalist. A lawyer. Someone outside the organization who can't be silenced. He glanced down the hallway. But you need to go. Now, before they realize you're still here. Daisy nodded. She slipped the drive into her pocket and turned toward the door. Daisy. She stopped. Dr. Park's voice was quiet. Your mother would be proud. Daisy's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded again and ran. Daisy ran until her lungs burned and her vision blurred. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. The USB drive felt like fire in her pocket. Evidence. Proof. The thing that could break an empire or get her killed trying. She ducked into an alley behind a closed convenience store and pressed her back against the wall, gasping for air. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. They're looking for you. Stay off main streets. I'll contact you soon. Daisy's hands shook as she typed back. Who is this? No response. She waited 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. She shoved the phone back in her pocket and kept moving, staying in the shadows, avoiding cameras when she could. Seoul never slept, but at 3 in the morning, even the city seemed to hold its breath. She passed shuttered shops and empty bus stops and people who looked through her like she was already a ghost. By the time the sun rose, Daisy had made it to a 24-hour internet cafe in Itaewon. She paid for 2 hours with coins she'd been saving and locked herself in a corner booth. Her fingers trembled as she plugged in the USB drive. Files opened across the screen. Medical records, lab results, toxicology reports. Everything Dr. Park had promised. Everything they'd tried to erase. Daisy stared at the numbers and felt something crack open in her chest. This was it. This was proof that her mother hadn't died from bad luck or fate or some invisible disease no one could name. She'd been poisoned, murdered, by people who treated human lives like collateral damage in a business plan. And now the same poison had reached the man at the top. Daisy copied the files to a cloud storage account she created with a fake name. Then she started searching for journalists. Not the big networks, they'd bury it or sell it back to the highest bidder. She needed someone small, someone hungry, someone who still believed the truth mattered. She found a name. Kim Min-jun. Independent reporter. Had broken stories on corporate corruption before. His contact info was listed on a bare-bones website that looked like it hadn't been updated in months. Daisy drafted an email. Short. Direct. Attached the files. Her finger hovered over the send button. If she did this, there was no going back. Kwon would know. The organization would know. And they would come for her with everything they had. But if she didn't, her mother's death meant nothing. The people still drinking poison water in Yongjae would keep dying in silence. And the men who'd turned a neighborhood into a graveyard would walk away untouched. Daisy hit send. Then she sat back and waited for the world to catch fire. 3 hours later, her phone rang. Unknown number again. But this time, a voice. Miss Spring, my name is Kim Min-jun. I received your email. Are the files legitimate? Daisy's throat was dry. Yes. Can you verify the source? A doctor at Seoul National University Hospital. He ran the tests himself. The Mafia erased the official records, but he made a backup. There was a pause on the other end. Then, do you understand what you're accusing these people of? Yes. Do you understand what they'll do to you if this goes public? Daisy closed her eyes. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll need to verify the data independently. If it checks out, I'll run the story. But you need to disappear. Tonight. Do you have somewhere safe? No. Kim exhaled slowly. I'll send you an address. Go there. Don't use your phone after this call. Don't contact anyone. I'll reach out when it's time. How long? 48 hours. Maybe less. The line went dead. Daisy sat in the dim glow of the computer screen, her heart pounding. 48 hours. The same amount of time Liam had been given to live. She logged out, wiped her browsing history, and left the cafe. The address Kim sent was in Hongdae, a small guest house tucked above a vinyl record shop. The owner was a woman in her 60s who asked no questions and took cash. Daisy paid for 3 nights and locked herself in a room barely bigger than a closet. She waited. The first 24 hours passed in silence. Daisy barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every siren in the distance felt like it was coming for her. On the second day, her old phone buzzed one last time before she turned it off for good. Dr. Park. Liam woke up. Daisy stared at the message. Her hands started shaking again. He's asking questions. Wants to know what happened. Kwon is trying to control the narrative. But Liam isn't listening. Something's shifting. Daisy typed back quickly. Did you tell him about the water? Not yet. But he knows something's wrong. And he's not dying quietly anymore. Daisy closed her eyes. She'd come to the hospital to expose the truth, not to save Liam Owen. But somewhere in the chaos, the two had become the same thing. If Liam lived long enough to understand what had been done to him, and what his empire had done to people like her mother, maybe the fracture Dr. Park had mentioned would split wide open. Maybe power could bleed after all. She turned off the phone and pulled the battery out. Then she waited. The story broke 36 hours after she sent the email. Kim Min-jun published it on his independent site first. Then it got picked up by a mid-tier news outlet. Then another. By noon, it was everywhere. Leaked documents, toxicology reports, testimony from a whistleblower doctor. And at the center of it all, a simple, devastating truth. A mafia-controlled shipping operation had been dumping industrial waste into residential water sources for years, poisoning entire neighborhoods. And when the poison finally reached the man at the top, the organization tried to bury the evidence rather than face what it had done. Daisy watched it unfold from a library computer, her heart in her throat. The comments section exploded. Outrage. Demands for investigation. Calls for arrests. People from Yangjae started coming forward with their own stories. Sick relatives. Dead children. Doctors who'd been told to look the other way. The silence had broken. But Daisy knew better than to celebrate. She'd lived long enough in the margins to know that truth didn't always win. Sometimes it just made the powerful more careful about who they hurt next. Her phone, the new burner she'd bought that morning, buzzed. Kim Min-jun. It's out. You need to stay hidden. They'll be looking for you. I know. There's something else. Liam Owen held a press meeting from his hospital bed an hour ago. You should watch it. Daisy found the video on a news site. The footage was shaky, clearly recorded on someone's phone. Liam sat propped up against pillows, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed but alert. Kwon stood behind him, stone-faced. A handful of reporters crowded the room. Liam's voice was hoarse, but steady. I didn't order the dumping, but I allowed the system that made it possible. I built an empire on silence and fear, and I told myself that was strength. It wasn't. It was cowardice. He paused, his breathing labored. The people responsible will be held accountable. Not just the ones who gave the orders, but the ones who looked away, including me. The room erupted in questions, but Liam raised a hand. There's a girl, Daisy Spring. She came to me when I was dying and told me the truth no one else would. She lost her mother to the same poison that nearly killed me. And she didn't stay silent. His eyes found the camera. If you're watching this, thank you. You saved more than my life. You saved what was left of my conscience. The video ended. Daisy sat frozen, staring at the screen. She didn't know what to feel. Relief, anger, grief, all of it at once, tangled and raw. Liam had spoken, but words weren't justice. Words didn't bring her mother back. Words didn't undo years of suffering. Still, it was a crack. a fracture in the foundation, and fractures Daisy knew had a way of spreading. Her phone buzzed again. Different number this time. Miss Spring, this is attorney Han Ji-woo. I represent a coalition of families affected by the contamination in Yongjae. We're filing a class action lawsuit against the responsible parties. We'd like you to testify. Will you help us? Daisy read the message 3 times. Then she typed back. Yes. She hit send and leaned back in her chair. Outside the library window, the city hummed with life. People going to work, buying groceries, living like the world wasn't on fire. But it was. And for the first time in her life, Daisy felt like she'd struck the match. Justice wasn't complete. Maybe it never would be. Powerful people had ways of surviving that ordinary people didn't. Lawyers, connections, money that could rewrite history. But the truth was out now. And once truth touched air, it didn't go back in the bottle. Daisy stood and walked out of the library into the morning light. She didn't know what came next. Didn't know if she'd be safe or hunted or forgotten. But she knew one thing. Her mother's death wouldn't be silence anymore. It would be sound. And sound, Daisy had learned, could break stone. Even when the stone thought it was unbreakable.